Hello there, and welcome to episode 34 of the Queer Money Follow-Up Series, which is part 4 of the 4 Principles of a Debt-Free Life.
Part 3. We still have one more after this.
Of the 4 Principles of a Debt-Free Life series. Oops.
We are just slightly hungover from yesterday. What happens when you go through dry January and not having anything, and then have 2 beers and 3 cocktails in a 6-hour period? The next day, you feel a little rough.
Yeah, exactly. So today we're talking about cash is king, the 3rd principle in the 4-part series, and this is one that people struggle with, and not so much understanding that cash is king. And by cash is king, we mean, especially as spending has become more easy these days, you can pay for something with tapping your credit card to a device, or tapping your phone against a device. It's become so simple and slick that there's no pain in the actual transaction, and there is legitimate loss of something when you're actually handing over cash to somebody for a product or a service. But there's actually some loss in that transaction that you're experiencing. Hopefully what you're getting in the product or service compensates for that, but you're much better able to quantify the what's going on. Whereas if you're just tapping a credit card to a device or your phone to a device, it's just transferring ones and zeros from one account to another.
Right. It's I think it was Jacob Goldstein in his book Money talked about this whole idea of us eventually getting rid of cash altogether. Right. That we will just simply no longer need it. And as you mentioned, then there's going to be this separation, this cognitive dissonance of understanding that money is actually going out of our account, or that we have less money, but not having any physical proof of it. And since so few of us actually log into our bank accounts on a regular basis, we're not even seeing that the numbers are going down. We just know that there's less, but there's less of something that was kind of an innocuous number anyway.
Yeah, it was nebulous before.
Right.
It's just still nebulous now. And so I would argue that with as easy as payment features have become, it's going to get harder and harder for people to stick to a budget, because they don't have that sort of that loss aversion. They don't feel that transaction actually taking place. It's becoming so seamless now. And there was a quote that I said in this particular episode, that most folks, for them, their budget number is really just a suggestion. Yeah. They're actually not sticking to a budget.
Well, and I think that the reason why that is the case is similar to what we just described. For most folks, it's an innocuous number, right? Okay, I have to stick to this number, but there's nothing really out there that confines me to that number, especially when we have access to debit cards that allow us to borrow, and credit cards that give us somewhat almost an unlimited supply of recycling money, right? As long as we're making the payments on it, we're going to continue to have access to money that we have never really earned yet, but we have access to that money.
Right.
And so I think why it becomes a suggestion is because people don't really have anything hard to define what their spending is. And that's why cash is king, or at least it was when we were paying our debt off. That's why it was so important, because when we limited ourselves to spending the physical cash. And for some folks, that may not mean that you're going to actually use physical cash. Today, you may use a debit card that doesn't have access to borrowing, but you have a defined number that you stick to. And that's the way that we were able to control our spending, so that we would be able to pay our debt off by having more money to put towards our debt.
So in a moment, we're going to cover 3 steps for making cash being king in your money plan. But we have a question for you first. Do you struggle to stick with a budget?
Yeah.
And if you do, as most people do, it seems, these next 3 tips that we're going to share with you will help you stick with that budget a little more easily.
Well, and I think what's interesting is I think there's been data that has shown that upwards of 80% of Americans don't actually have a budget that they stick to. Kind of would make sense then why so many people struggle financially, because they're spending money they don't have without some sort of guidelines as to how much money they really should be spending.
Right, and similar to what we talked about with Brian Thompson, then it gets to a point where people get really scared. They don't want to do a budget because they don't want to They don't want to realize where they actually are, right? They don't want to. It's easier to avoid the truth if you don't know the truth than it is to see it on a spreadsheet to see what your finances look like, and then not have to take any action. It's kind of hard to do.
Yeah.
So here are 3 steps to make cash being king a principle in your life. Step 1, separate your discretionary spending cash and pay all your non-discretionary discretionary expenses separately.
So your discretionary items are ones where you have the discretion or the ability to say yes or no to that, right? I can decide whether or not we're going to go out to dinner or if we're going to buy a bottle of wine. I cannot decide if I'm going to pay my rent or pay the electrical bill. Those are non-discretionary. You don't have any choice there. So for all of those ones that you don't have a choice, and oftentimes that's because we've made purchases in the past or we have signed up for some sort of service in the past that requires us to set that money aside and pay for that. Separate the two out, and as much as possible, automate the money going out of your account for those non-discretionary items. That way, you don't have to even think about having that money. It's automatically gone, and what you're left over with is the money that you have the ability to say yes or no, we're going to spend this.
Right. It's very easy to see, okay, now that all of our expenses are being covered, otherwise, it's very easy to see, okay, this is the finite amount of cash that we have available to spend until we get our next paycheck. And it's a lot easier to track when you separate it out like that because you know exactly what you've got available to you.
Right. It's kind of interesting. You've seen these memes that go around about how people feel on Friday that's a payday and how they feel on Monday when it's the weekend has passed, right? You get this huge number that comes into your bank account and you automatically think, oh, yay, I'm rich. And then we can spend a bunch of money. And then you do. But then all of a sudden you have all your discretionary bills that need to be paid and you don't have enough money left over for the month that's... And I screwed this one up the other day too.
More month left over at the end of your money.
Yeah, exactly.
Step number 2 is to use the envelope system. Now, this is a strategy that David and I use to pay off our $51,000 in credit card debt. There have been a lot of apps that have tried to capture this essence of the envelope system, a lot of strategies. But ultimately, I think I've decided that nothing is actually any better than the actual hardcore envelope system. So what that system is for all of your discretionary expenses, and for us, we limited to 3 when we were paying off our credit card debt. Our social spending, our gas spending, and our grocery spending. So we had 3 separate envelopes that we knew that we had budgeted a specific dollar amount of our paycheck went into every paycheck. We would take that money out from ATM, put it into those envelopes, and then that's all we had available to spend in those particular categories until our next paycheck. So we had to get very militant about, when we go to the grocery store, we had to have a very good estimate of what we were going to spend and know that we had to stay within that finite amount of cash that was in that particular grocery envelope.
Yeah. It's interesting. A lot of people say that this works because they actually have proof. An example of this is Alan from the Queer Money Facebook group, who talked about how he has gone from basically being homeless and living on the streets to now more recently moving into a 2-bedroom apartment with his partner and paying for much of that through this process of putting money into the envelope system so that he knew exactly how much money he could spend, and then now today how much he and his partner can spend. It works. It has helped him get out of or get to this point where now he feels much more financially stable in his life.
Yeah, it's a super simple, very rudimentary, crude almost strategy, but it works.
Yep.
So don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. Whatever number of discretionary expenses that you have each month, now it might be more than just the 3 that we used. We've heard of some people having as many as 12 envelopes. So whatever is appropriate for your particular situation, but itemize all of those spending categories on an envelope, and then put the appropriate amount of cash in each envelope to get you from one pay period to the next. And that's probably the most surest way to make sure that you don't overspend your budget from month to month. Step number 3 is our unique, actually David created it, money chunking system. Yeah. David, what is money chunking?
Well, so thinking back to the meme, what we've talked about, how people feel on Friday and versus Monday, oftentimes we get this amount of money and we blow the whole wad right away, right?
Whoa.
We go out and we just have fun and have an amazing weekend, and all of a sudden we're left with no money left over for the rest of the month. So money chunking basically is using somewhat of the envelope system and your time horizon and breaking your money into chunks. It's good to know what you plan on doing for the next couple of weeks so you can break that apart, right? So if next weekend is somebody's birthday and you have to have some extra money there, you may rob money from one week and put it into another. So an example of this may be maybe you only have $200 for the whole month for social spending. That means that if there's 4 weeks during this particular month, then you break that down into an easy number of $50 each week. And then, like I said, you may be robbing from one and putting it a little bit more into the others, or you may find that your first week you don't spend it all, and that allows you to roll it over to the next week. But money chunking really does take this whole idea of confining your spending to a specific number even one step further.
Yeah, it's actually it's a very practical strategy because very often, like you said, you get that big infusion of cash because it's payday, and you get all excited and you have an amazing weekend. And then whether you're paid monthly or biweekly, you're going the next 2 to 4 weeks where you've kind of used all of your money, and so now very often what people will default to is using their credit card, and then that keeps racking up. Now you can, like you said, if you've got 4 weeks to cover and you've got $50 for each weekend, and you know that you're going to a birthday party in 2 weeks, well, then you might say, okay, I'm going to lay low this weekend, save that $50 to put it towards the other $50, so you have $100 to spend on that birthday weekend with that friend. But it allows you to become more strategic and spread your money out farther, so that or longer, so that you actually have a good quality of life the entire pay period and not just on payday.
Yeah. Exactly.
So those are our 3 tips for making cash king in your life. Thank you for joining us for another Queer Money Follow-Up. Here is your Queer Money Follow-Up takeaway from this particular episode. Go out and get your copy of the 4 Principles of a Debt-Free Life, which we've linked to in the description below. And then let us know in the comments if you're interested.
Do you struggle to stick to a budget? Because if you do, you're not alone. But these tools may help you stick to the budget that you've created for yourself.
Absolutely.
So remember to join us tomorrow for episode 35, where we will wrap up the 4th principle in this series of 4 Principles of a Debt-Free Life, which is about having a financial plan. So thank you again. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and set notifications on so you know when we go live next time.
Awesome. Thanks
you.
Again. We'll talk to you tomorrow.